Hello, my name is Michelle Holloway, and I am pastor of the Baker and Haynes United Methodist Churches in Baker City and Haynes, Oregon. This message is for November 8th, 2020, and if you received the newsletter, you would have seen that I had originally titled it Bridesmaids' Duties, but since then I've decided to go in a little bit different direction, and so this is entitled Choose Wisely. Also, please excuse the earbuds and the microphone, but I discovered that last week's audio quality wasn't quite what I wanted it to be. Today we have three stories of people who needed to make decisions. Some chose wisely and others didn't. Hear first this passage from the book of Joshua, from Joshua 24. Now, if you are unwilling to serve the Lord, choose this day whom you will serve, whether the gods of your ancestors served in the region beyond the river or the gods of the Amorites in whose land you are living. But as for me and my household, we will serve the Lord. Then the people answered, Far be it from us that we should forsake the Lord to serve other gods. For it is the Lord our God who brought us and our ancestors up from the land of Egypt, out of the house of slavery, and who did those great signs in our sight. He protected us along the way that we went, and among all the peoples through whom we passed. And the Lord drove out before us all the peoples, the Amorites who lived in the land. Therefore, we also will serve the Lord, for he is our God. In this passage, we find Joshua himself admonishing the people of Israel to make a choice for or against the I am, the one who brought them out of Egypt. The choice was to be final once and for all. The Israelites had developed a bad pattern in their faith. They believed the Holy One of Israel while things were good. Then, when things weren't quite going so smoothly, they would begin to whine and complain. They cried out, Oh God, why didn't you just leave us in Egypt? At least we had food, clothing, a place to sleep, and work to occupy us. All we have here is desert, desert, desert. Have you brought us out of slavery just so we can die in the wilderness? When the people started behaving this way, God would leave them alone. God would let them make their choices and see where they ended up. Eventually, the people would realize that they really were better off with God than without God. And would God ask God to rescue them once again? Over and over and over, the Hebrew people would ignore God when things were good and complain about God when things were bad. This was not a good decision-making pattern. They would move into a new land, and usually the people already living there had their own gods to worship and didn't know about or chose not to worship the God of Israel. So, to be polite, the Israelites would begin to worship the local idols and household gods. We know that God had given them commandments of thou shalt have no other gods and no idols, no graven images. You can almost hear the Israelites thinking, it would be rude of us to continue worshiping the great I am when these people we're living with don't know who that is. So again, to be polite, we will bow down to our images made, to their images made of wood, clay, and shiny metals. It's good PR. And the people of this country will like us better and maybe won't be in such a hurry to run us off or kill us. This was their life. They would worship foreign gods and forget about the living God. This always got them in trouble, and they would cry out to the true God to be rescued. God wouldn't always respond immediately in their favor, but God could be persuaded to act and always forgave the Israelites. And in response, the Israelites returned to God. This was the behavior pattern that Joshua was calling them to change. It was time for a decision. Would they choose the Holy One who had been faithful to them all these years? Joshua said, choose this day the one you will worship. We now have a parable of 10 bridesmaids that takes us in a different direction than Joshua and the Israelites. Here we have 10 young women preparing for a wedding. It helps to understand the custom of that time. I'm going to pause just a moment. Let me read for you the passage from Matthew 25. Then the kingdom of heaven will be like this. 10 bridesmaids took their lamps and went to meet the bridegroom. 5 of them were foolish, and 5 were wise. When the foolish took their lamps, they took no oil with them. But the wise took flasks of oil with their lamps. As the bridegroom was delayed, all of them became drowsy and slept. But at midnight there was a shout, "Look, here comes the bridegroom. Come out to meet him." Then all those bridesmaids got up and trimmed their lamps. The foolish said to the wise, "Give us some of your oil, for our lamps are going out." But the wise replied, "No, there will not be enough for you and for us. You had better go to the dealers and buy some for yourselves." And while they went to buy it, the bridegroom came, and those who were ready went with him into the wedding banquet, and the door was shut. Later, the other bridesmaids came also, saying, "Lord, Lord, open to us." But he replied, "Truly I tell you, I do not know you. Keep awake, therefore, for you know neither the day nor the hour." It helps to understand the custom of that time. Many years ago, a doctor shared his experience of driving through a Galilean town. He wrote about seeing 10 brightly clad young women playing musical instruments and dancing down the road in front of his car. When he asked the driver what was happening, he was told that these young women were on their way to keep the bride company as they awaited the arrival of the groom. No one knew when the wedding would take place. It could have been that night, the next night, or 2 weeks later. It was always up to the bridegroom to decide when he was going to arrive. The driver went on to explain that one of the great things to do at a middle-class wedding in Palestine was to catch the bridal party napping. That's why the groom wouldn't let anyone know when he would get there. It could be the middle of the night. The groom was required to send a man ahead to go through the street shouting, "Behold, the bridegroom comes." Whenever this happened, the bridal party must be ready to go out on the street to meet him. One of the interesting aspects of this is that no one was allowed to be on the streets after dark without a lighted lamp. And once the bridegroom had arrived and the door was closed, no one else was allowed inside. This was the custom Jesus was speaking of when he was talking about the kingdom of heaven. The bridal party had a choice to make. They needed to come prepared to wait for up to 2 weeks. If they didn't choose wisely, they could be left without any oil for their lamps, and they would not be permitted out on the streets after dark, and therefore they'd be left out of the wedding. Choose wisely. Prepare for the future. The other example I want to share is the story we find in the Gospel of Luke. Most of us have heard this man's story. He was known in a children's song as a wee little man. His name was Zacchaeus. Luke 19. Jesus entered Jericho and was passing through it. A man was there named Zacchaeus. He was a chief tax collector and was rich. He was trying to see who Jesus was, but on account of the crowd, he could not, because he was short in stature. So he ran ahead and climbed a sycamore tree to see him, because he was going to pass that way. When Jesus came to the place, he looked up and said to him, "Zacchaeus, hurry down, for I must stay at your house today." So Zacchaeus hurried down and was happy to welcome Jesus. All who saw it began to grumble and say, "Jesus has gone to be the guest of one who is a sinner." Zacchaeus stood there and said to the Lord, "Look, half of my possessions, Lord, I will give to the poor. And if I have defrauded anyone of anything, I will pay back 4 times as much." Then Jesus said to him, "Today salvation has come to this house, because he too is a son of Abraham. For the Son of Man came to seek out and to save the lost." Zacchaeus lived well. He had an upper-class family, and yet he was hated by his fellow Jews. In fact, they called him a sinner. He had chosen to serve Rome instead of serving God. Because he was a small man, his position as chief tax collector gave him power over those people who had taunted him from the time he was a child. He could force his neighbors to pay taxes well beyond what was expected, and if they didn't pay, he had the authority to seize their property. Tax collectors were truly hated men, for they were Hebrews working on behalf of the oppressors and taking things above and beyond what they deserved. There was no love lost here. But one day everything changed. Zacchaeus climbed a tree to get a better view of a controversial rabbi who was coming into town. Zacchaeus was familiar with climbing trees. It was how he got away from the other children when he was younger. And it was how he got high enough to actually know what was happening around him. But this time it was different. This time, the man he was looking at stopped, called his name, and told him that he would be staying at Zacchaeus' house that night. Zacchaeus could have said no. He was already in enough trouble with his fellow Jews. Why would he want to take any more risks? But he came down from the tree, and Jesus went with him. We don't know much of what happened. According to Luke, all that happened was Zacchaeus stood before Jesus and immediately repented of his sins. No thought, no worry as to who would hear him make this confession. He simply blurted out that he would return all he had taken over the years. I can imagine how standing in the presence of the Son of God could cause us to blurt out our failures and ask for forgiveness. Jesus spent the night and in the morning headed on down the road. What do we suppose happened then? Let's speculate. Can we picture the reaction of Zacchaeus' wife and children? "You're giving away what? You're going to make us poor because Jesus is spending the night? I don't think so. We really don't know what happened with this man who, in the presence of Jesus, gave his life and his wealth to make his community better. What we are told is that he made his choice, and by choosing, he chose wisely. If he had followed through with his promise, he would, of course, have less money, but he would be rich in the knowledge that he was following God. In all three of these situations, Joshua and the Israelites, the 10 bridesmaids, and Zacchaeus, they were challenged to step up and make a wise decision. That's what we're called to do many, many times in our lives. Choose this day the one you will serve, and choose well. We do have a choice. We can serve God, the one who loved us first and loves us still, or we can let our lights go out and be left in the dark. It's our choice. Do we get that? It's our choice, yours and mine, as individuals. We choose to love and serve God, or we don't. We choose whether to be prepared to participate in all that means. We choose to follow Jesus and have our lives changed. We have the opportunity every day to choose God, to let our actions be our witnesses to the choices and decisions we have made. Choose this day and every day the one you will serve. Amen.